Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We are meeting today on September 16th to talk about the NHD rules and our judging rubrics and judging criteria. We have a lot to go over. And again, I feel like you guys should know by now, but my name is Wendy Rex-Atzet. I'm the state coordinator for National History Day in Utah. I will try to move sort of efficiently through, but I hope that our live participants will speak up if they have questions as we go. We have just a lot of detail kind of talking to go through today. We will start by talking about plagiarism that ties in as both a rule and as a teaching skill. We'll offer some clarity about credits and citations and how that relates to plagiarism. Then we'll get into the rule book, and then we'll finish up by looking at our judging rubrics. So can we talk why is it so hard to teach kids about plagiarism? What makes this hard? I mean, I have my own ideas, but if any of our guests would like to offer their experiences.
I just think because with the internet, there's so much information out there that's hard. They can find anything anywhere at any time, and they don't understand that there's rules involved with finding information, copyright and plagiarism laws and all that they just don't get. It's just out there, and they think they can use it whenever they want.
Yeah, I think that you have tapped into about the biggest problem. And if you think about, when I'm pretty old, when I was in school, you looked at books to do research and you wrote on note cards to write down your citation information and your quotes and your notes. And so to me, something about that physical process made this a little easier to understand. Still wasn't totally straightforward when you get into paraphrasing and quoting and whatnot, but at least it made sense that I'm getting my information out of a book that somebody else wrote, right? And the internet has just kind of shattered that concept, I think, of somebody authored this. There is a provenance to this, right? And the other thing that I think makes it even worse is the way that kids plug in to information and into social media. Provenance is really obscured. Like if you think about social media posts, typically you don't know where it originated, who wrote it, or when. Like it's often really hard to see when. And because it's so normalized now to just cut and copy, either take a screenshot, or if you're researching on a computer and you're going to grab some text off of an article that you're looking at on the web and you put it into your own notes. Those acts of just grabbing and pasting or grabbing and sharing without filling an apparatus around them of where did this come from? What's the source? I need to document it. It's not natural to kids anymore because the way that they are learning and integrating information into their world does not involve that at all. It's all very much, I'm going to grab and I'm going to go, grab, go. And so there's a lot of teaching that needs to happen around plagiarism. And History Day gives you a great reason to do some of that teaching. And then that's also really going to help them. We've talked about how a lot of these skills feed right back into media literacy, digital citizenship, civic literacy. It's all the same skill set, right? It's like really questioning the sources of information and looking at the messaging and looking at the perspective and the bias and making an evaluation about whether it's credible. So this ties very neatly into why plagiarism is important, but also difficult to teach. So we actually built this a year ago, a Quizlet called Pull the Plug on Plagiarism. And it is a student-facing tool that, we've reproduced it in the the big teacher guide that we create every year, the big PDF, but I encourage you to share the Quizlet with the kids because it really is a flashcards based gamified product that walks them through a lot of the scenarios that they're going to face when they are figuring out how to quote things, how to cite things. You know, if I change 2 words in the sentence, is it still a quote or is it a paraphrase, or do I still need to cite it? So a lot of those particulars about when you're plagiarizing and when you aren't, we tried to cover in this Quizlet. Has anybody used that Quizlet yet? No? Okay. Well, hopefully you'll use it this year. And then we have a new tool. You know what? I should give you the, I'll show you. That's the Quizlet. And I'll put the link in the chat as well. Let's see. I want to go to the chat. Where's my chat bar? Okay, there is the link to the Quizlet. So you can kind of tool around in there and check it out. Okay, go back to present view. All right. So that's kind of what I have to say about plagiarism. I also this year did a lot of judging in the spring, and I was thinking about where kids seem to get confused. And I think so the next step in teaching plagiarism, it goes hand in hand with teaching kids how to give proper credit to their sources in their project. And I don't know how straightforward this is for students as they do their History Day projects, but I think maybe it's not as straightforward. Oh, the link isn't working. All right, Brian. Hey, if I come back to this at the end, I can probably give you a cleaner link. Just remind me to do that. So this is a new tool that you will find in our new Padlets, and it's called Giving Proper Credit to Your Sources. And again, this is most of what I build. The tools are student facing that you can use with your students, and it is designed as a flow chart to kind of walk them through. So the big main idea is that with any source, there are 2 options for how to use the information from that source. And these options are the same. We treat them the same, whether they're a primary source or a secondary source. Your options are to quote the source using exactly their words and enclosing their words in quotation marks, or you can paraphrase the source by summarizing the author in your own words, which means you're not using their words at all. Those are the options. Anything in the middle there, where they're using mostly the author's words or mixing in a few of their own words, that's not on this chart, okay? So it should be a really clear distinction. You can use a direct quote or you can summarize in your own words. And that's really, I think, a key to thinking about this. And either way that you do this, you still need to give credit to that source because it's their idea or their words that you're using. Let's see, and I think I have another slide that talks a little more about good quoting habits. Okay, so then the next thing in the flow chart is that whichever thing you do, whether you quote or whether you paraphrase, you have to cite it in 2 places in your project. You're going to cite it in your bibliography and you're going to cite it in your project itself. So first, let's talk about how credit looks in an annotated bibliography. We can use MLA or Chicago style. Pick one for your whole class to use, and everybody uses the same thing. Really don't go back and forth between them. I know that most schools use MLA in their English departments, and so that's fine. Students should check with their teacher. Historians use Chicago. There are some good reasons for that. So if you have flexibility and you want to teach Chicago, use Chicago. Some formatting notes about the bibliography. It should be single spaced, just like the blue text that you see here. You should use a hanging indent for the citation and then a full indent for the annotation. So that means that your citation starts on the left, hanging indent 0.5 inches towards the right, and then your annotation lines up with that hanging indent. Okay, and then you have an empty space between the citation and the annotation. Oops, gosh. And then you have another empty space between that annotation and then the next entry. Gosh. The annotations, that's this part. That should explain why the source is relevant to the project, how the students used it, and the annotations should not be long or extensive, maximum 3 sentences. Okay. And the citation is going to look a little bit different depending on whether you're using MLA style or Chicago style. But this is a formatted citation of a primary source in the example. Okay, then, so the first place you're going to give credit is in the annotated bibliography. And we talked about using Noodle Tools or Scribble and using some kind of source tracking system during the research phase so that it's easy to do this now when they get into building their project and they need to start building those credits. So then there are different ways to give credit in the project depending on the category that they're doing. If they are in exhibits or websites, they need to use what we call a source credit. And that should go beneath every quote and every image in the project. Now, source credits are not a full citation. The big long citation with the URL and everything, that goes in the bibliography. The source credits are short and they are just designed to tell us and for students to give credit to the place where they got the item. So a brief title of the source, the year that it was made or created, and then the archive or repository found it, where they found it. And I've got it illustrated in blue here with parentheses. I actually think that's not a rule, but I think that's a good practice because it makes it clear to the student and to the judges that all that's in here is source credit information. If students write more explaining the quote or the image, that's called a caption. Okay, and so where source credits aren't counted against the word limit in these categories, captions do count as part of their student composed words. In the paper category, inside the paper itself, students need to use either footnotes or endnotes or parenthetical references to cite quotes and paraphrases. And probably images, although images will go in an appendix. So in NHD, we really prefer that students use footnotes or endnotes rather than parentheticals. This is what a footnote or an endnote looks like. Oh, I see I have a typo. And that means there's a typo in my original tool. Oh, that's going to drive me crazy. Okay, so you insert a numbered marker, this little number 4, at the end of each quote or paraphrase in the paper. So even if they're paraphrasing, they still need to put this little note number marker. And then, you know, your word processing software will do this. If you insert a note, then it creates a little field at the bottom of the page or at the end of the paper where the notes go that correlate to those numbers. And this is also needs to be formatted by the style, MLA or Chicago, and the style for a note, not a bibliographic entry. They are different. It's frustrating that they're different, but they are different. Okay. And then in documentaries and performances, kids may think, oh, people are listening to my script, and so I don't need to cite my sources in my script. However, it's a really good idea for kids to make it clear, especially when they are quoting a source, or if they're paraphrasing something very closely, it's really good to give an indicator in your script that you're doing that. So you can identify the person you're quoting or paraphrasing in a couple of ways. You can set it up. You can use a subtitle if you're doing a documentary. You could use some kind of signage or a costuming device if you're doing a performance. Documentaries, I've also seen kids just put the quote up as, not as a subtitle, but as words on the main part of the screen if they really want to emphasize the quote. So there are a lot of things they can do to make it clear that they're quoting or paraphrasing. The other thing they can do is use framing words in the script. So you can say, President Roosevelt told fearful Americans during the Great Depression, quote, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, unquote. Okay, so in every category, there are, you need to be clear, particularly in these two, when you are quoting or paraphrasing. Okay, so we talked about the bibliography. I thought this would be the right time to talk about all of the required written materials that go with a project to the competition. They are called required written materials. It's a bit of a mouthful, but what that means is your annotated bibliography and your process paper. And every project needs to have those materials done and included for the competition. If it is a group project, the group writes one version of each of these. Okay, so we don't want one from each student in the group. We want one set of required written materials for each project. So I always like to talk about the annotated bib, as this is how historians show their work. Kind of like in math, when your math teacher says you have to show your work because I need to know how you got to your answer, historians need to show their work. They need to show everyone what sources they used and where those sources came from. Okay, and then that allows the people who are reading your work to actually go look up your sources, and they can verify your research, make sure you're being honest about what you're doing and saying. And then they can also build off your own analysis and kind of continue the conversation by looking at those sources and maybe coming up with a different interpretation or using that as a springboard into another kind of research question. Let's see, I already talked a little bit about the formatting stuff and ways to use the annotations. A couple of other notes here just to call out for you are, if they are using a whole lot of photos from one collection, they can just put in a citation for that collection and then explain in the annotation that they used a number of photos from that one collection. And just to confirm, the annotated bibliography is not included against any of the word counts. Okay. Let's see, other formatting things. Make sure that the bibliography is divided into primary and secondary sources. Primary sources go first. The title of this is annotated bibliography. It's not works cited or references, because that's not what it is. It's an annotated bib. And then optional is subdividing within primary and secondary the types of source. I like this because I think it helps kids and judges see the difference between like images and documents and the other kinds of sources that they're using.
Wendy, do you find that a lot of those kids that go to nationals have subdivided? I just feel like when you get higher up, you see that more often.
Yes, I think they do. And it's not a rule.
Right.
However, it's a good practice. It's not something that like Noodle Tools won't do that for you.
Right, right.
So you kind of have to do it yourself, but
Right.
it's a nice, here's the problem. If you think about documentaries, for example, where the kids need to probably have 50 images, if they just alphabetize all their sources, I'm as a reader of the bibliography, I'm going to be looking through and I'm going to be wanting to know where the key content sources are, more than where the photographs are. And so if you've chunked out the photos into their own subset, then it's easy for me to see, oh, look, they have this many articles, they read these great books, and they did an interview, and that is clear from a subtitle that says my interviews. These are the photos I use, these are the websites, these are the video clips, here's the multimedia. And so it actually makes it easier to read the bibliography for the judges. However, it is a lot more work to do that. And you may find that, you don't want to do that for regional or maybe state, but if you have a student who goes on to nationals, maybe you do.
Gotcha.
Maybe that's the time to invest that extra work in it.
Well, I do think it would help them realize they need to be well-rounded in all the sources that they're getting.
Exactly.
In other words, don't have one, secondary source and 37 pictures, so it's like, and if you break them out, you can see, oh, I have, one good secondary source and 37 pictures. So it's kind of, okay.
Yes, exactly. I think that is a good practice, and that's a good reason to do it. It's just your bib generators won't do it for you. They'll generate something, but then they'll have to move things around.
Right.
But I 100% agree with you that it does help students kind of map out where their research has been heavier or thinner. And it's easy to find images. It can be hard to find good documents. So, okay. And then the second part of the written materials is the process paper. If you are somebody who's done paper category in the past, I want to emphasize that kids who are in the paper category also do need to write the process paper from now on. And with the new rule book, we changed up some of the guiding questions, the prompts for the process paper, because we really want this to get kids to think about the research and learning process that we went to. And we were getting a lot of responses like, well, I went to Home Depot to buy some wood, and my mom took me to the library. And so when we say, how did you create your project? It's not so much how I built it with things, it's how I built it with my ideas. Right? So we really want to get them thinking more about the learning and their thinking. Okay, so there is a great tool to help kids write their process paper where they can just respond to each of these prompts. It's totally fine for them to write this in first person. And the maximum length is 500 words. Make sure that kids, don't use quotes or subheadings in this. It really is just follow the prompts and answer the questions, but focus on the intellectual parts of the process rather than the mechanical. Okay. All right. Okay, the rule book. Let's see. Let me just quickly. You can easily get to the rule book on the NHD website, which of course isn't going to be easy for me to do because I didn't put the full link in. And you should have gotten one in your packet. Did you guys get your boxes? I think we sent out rule books with the boxes this year. So it's easy to get the rule book. It's free and it's newly redesigned. This is our second year using this new rule book. I think it's greatly improved over the one we had before. Make sure you're using the current version. And we were going to talk about how do you use this massive rule book, because it is a big, thick book. And I think that there is a place to use it at the beginning of your process. There may be some places you want to use it in the middle of the process. And then there's definitely a time to use it at the end of the process. So that's kind of how I've organized going through here. This new rule book has a lot of really useful guidebook kind of information. And so you'll see the guidebook sections at the beginning where we just explain what primary and secondary sources are. And we give some good, clear information about interviewing people as part of your research and how, doing oral history means interviewing somebody who is a primary source for your topic. That's not the same as interviewing a historian and asking them to tell you all about the topic. Okay, that's a secondary source, and we actually really discourage kids from interviewing secondary sources. We want them to interview people who would be considered primary sources on the topic. Let's see, we've answered questions about, if they find a quote, say in a textbook, that is useful to them, how do you deal with that? We call that finding a source within another source. We've got some explanation there for how to treat that. The best case scenario is that the kids will go look up the original, because if they just take the quote out of the textbook, they aren't seeing any of the context around the quote, right? And so it's important to see that context and see that quote as part of its larger source, rather than just pulling it out of the textbook to use. We have a great chart on what constitutes reasonable adult help. And we've got some good information on how to count words in the different categories, and some good definitions of what source credits are and captions and that kind of thing. So this is information that I think early you will want to review so that you can kind of talk about these things when it comes up. But also, this is kind of, I think you'll come to this in the middle of the process too, if kids are having questions as they do the research. Here are some really important rules, like rules that the kids need to follow, that they need to know early on. Rule number 1, this is how they're listed in the book, that the research needs to be started in the current contest year, which starts on July 1st. What this means is that kids cannot build on the same topic from year to year to year to year. They need to start over with a new topic and do new research every year. You'll have a lot of kids who have an interest in like World War II or the Cold War. That's okay, but they need to pick a very different topic and not reuse sources from work that they've done before. Rule 4 is the original work rule. This means that the work done is done by this particular student, not by an older sibling several years ago and they just pull it out of the basement, not by another student that they're sharing research, not by mom or dad, that it's the original work of the student. Plagiarism, we talked about. Reasonable adult help. You all know the parents that you're going to be working with, and this can be a real problem in some schools, like over involvement of the parents, and then in other schools it's hardly an issue. And so there are a lot of guidelines in the rule book about how to think about what's a reasonable amount of parent help. For younger kids, more help is going to be not problematic. Anytime kids are using power tools, I think parents should probably be helping. But what we want to avoid is parents taking over the project, and just doing the work for the kids. All right, and then there is a really important rule about hazardous materials and prohibited items. We just have taken a really hard line on weapons and replicas and toys that look like weapons. That was a big gray area for a long time, but I've honestly had parents walk into one of my contests carrying an actual gun and saying it's fine because the pin is out. It's not fine. So we wanted to be really clear, because there are a lot of replicas and toys that look very real. These are public events. We just cannot have anything that is a weapon or is a toy or a replica of a weapon. And that's going to include swords, guns, knives, hatchets, anything like that. They can make something out of cardboard and paint it, but that's the most they can do. And then hazardous materials, this is like anything that might damage the venue, or people might have an allergy if they touched it, like a dry ice machine, or, you know, things like that. Okay. And then one of the really common points of, I'm not going to say confusion, but people really need clarity on what do we mean by student composed words. This is how words are counted in the exhibit category and the website category only. And students do need to understand what we're looking for and how to count their words. So as student composed words include the following: the student's narrative, their project title, any headers, their subheads, captions, timelines that the students create, multimedia that the students create. It's basically all of the text that is composed by the students in the project. So not included as a student composed word is direct quotes, the source credits, if they use actual documents or images in their project, their footnotes or endnotes, their annotated bibliography, and their process paper are all not included in that student composed word count. Okay, and here's where I had my guidelines for quoting. This is from a tool that's in the Padlet and in the guide. When you're quoting, you want to be careful about quoting too much and quoting too little, right? There is an art to quoting well. So you do want to use primary source quotes to present the historical evidence that's informing their argument. You don't want to use secondary source quotes to get around the word limit. You really don't want to do that. That's why we invented student voice. You do always, when you're quoting, want to be very selective and precise, because quoting one or two powerful sentences is going to be a lot more effective than pasting in a whole paragraph. The more students can zoom in the focus on the really meaningful part of the quote, the more mileage they will get out of it. Plus, their project won't look so crowded. It's just more effective in almost every way to do that. Any questions about this? How to count, how to think of student composed words and how to quote? Okay. All right, and then here is what I would save for later from the rule book. I would save pretty much all of the category specs. So after the kids have gone through the research process and done a lot of the writing, but before they actually start to build their project, that's the point where I think you come back to the rule book and you really drill down on the details for their category. Okay, I've created a number of summary tools, which I'm going to use in these slides today, but don't rely on the summaries when it comes time to build. Make sure that the kids are reading the rule book and they understand all of the category rules, because there are a lot of detailed specs for each of the creative categories. This, again, this is a summary. It is not, there's more in the rule book, but these are the essentials. So exhibits, you know, the size of the exhibit space, the student composed word limit for exhibits is 500 words maximum. That is the challenge of doing an exhibit, is getting your point across in 500 words or less of student composed words and not overusing quotes. There is exhibit kids can use up to 2 minutes of multimedia if they would like. Source credits are required beneath the images and quotes on the board, as well as a complete citation in the bibliography. There are some setup issues that we want to make sure families know about for in-person contests. And that is that students really need to set up their exhibit once they get to the contest on their own. Of course, grownups can help carry the things into the building and help lift the boards up onto the table, but students need to be putting that exhibit together once it's all set up there on the table. There are some rules about self-contained materials in the exhibit. We don't want you to be linking out your multimedia to YouTube or using QR codes, because those are ways that get around those limits of size and words and multimedia time. Okay. I will move on to the next category unless people have questions. Okay, we'll talk about the websites. This one
I have
probably,
a question about
go
that
ahead,
last-
Brian.
At one point, I thought you said they could do like almost like a little screen and do some like a little video. Oh, the multimedia. That's the optional one, right?
Yes,
The multimedia. That's 2 minutes maximum. Okay.
yes.
But any words on that or anything don't count towards the student total, or is that true?
So usually what multimedia is and isn't in an exhibit is like, say,
Video clips.
it's video and audio clips typically, and it will typically be primary sources or maybe music. I know Renee's granddaughter did a project on the Beatles, and her multimedia was Beatles music tracks running. I may be remembering that slightly wrong, but I think that's what she did. So it's stuff like that. It's not really meant to present more student argument. It is a way to bring in those kinds of primary sources. That's a great question. Thanks, Brian. All right, let's talk about websites. If you have kids building websites, make sure that they look at the rulebook carefully when they get started. There are a lot of technical details for this category. The most important thing is that they do need to use NHD Web Central as their builder. That's integrated with our contest management system. And so that's what they need to use. The word limit for websites is 1,200 student composed words. That's the maximum. They can do less. And then the multimedia limit for websites is 3 minutes maximum. Again, a website is a good category to choose if kids have multimedia video and audio clips that they can pull in from their research. Source credits are required in this category as well, just the way they are in exhibits, and we talked about those already. Websites do need to be self-contained. That means they cannot link outside of their Web Central site to, say, a YouTube video that is lives on YouTube. Okay, so everything needs to be contained in the website without linking outside of it. There is what's called a site key for each Web Central site. And they need to know what that is so that they can provide it to us when they register for their contest. That key is what's going to allow us to link judges to their website to be viewed. And then the required written materials need to be made into 2 separate PDFs and then embedded in the website. And there's a tool in there. I would recommend, having looked at a lot of websites, I would recommend that kids do not put these PDFs side by side on their page, but they put them top and bottom, because they're much easier for the judges to read if the view window is bigger. All right, questions about website? Okay. Paper, this is the easiest, shortest specs. We already know that you can use MLA or Chicago. We already know that you should use footnotes or endnotes. Those are preferred. The word count for a paper, there is a minimum. It's 1,500 to 2,500 words in the body of the paper. That doesn't include their footnotes, endnotes, bibliography, appendices, and it doesn't include the process paper either. So they will write a process paper to tell the judges about their research process. That's required now in this category. And so it needs to be layered in with their materials after the title page and before their paper begins. Performances are meant to be performed live. If we are virtual and they're submitting recordings, they still need to be shot in one take live and not edited. So it is meant to be a live kind of medium. The time limit is 10 minutes maximum. And the time starts after the students state their name and the project title. Students should be designing, creating their sets, setting up and operating their equipment without adult help. But adults can help them carry sets into the building. Students can either make or buy or rent costumes. They don't need to have really elaborate costumes. It's not required. And performances can be really successful with simple costumes. So, encourage them to think creatively and spend less money, I would say. And it's fine if parents want to help sew the costumes, that's okay. Any questions about performances? Oh, new rule about audience interaction. We're trying to be clear that we're not having audience interaction as part of performances. Okay, moving on. Documentaries are similar to performances, a 10-minute maximum. Students need to write the script, do the recordings, the editing, the narrating, operating all the equipment, all that without adult help. Adults can show them how to use the software, but students need to do the work. And I'm going to say right now that next week and the next week, the Utah Film Center is going to do our 2 sessions for us that are specific to making documentaries for NHD and how to guide your students through the process. And they've got loads of great tools. So be sure to join us. I met with Julie today. It's going to be so good. Let's see. Other questions that come up about documentaries. This just came into me this week. Students are not supposed to be performing in their documentaries. It's not a reenactment film. It's a Ken Burns documentary. Okay, so the images should be primary sources or video clips, still photos, but not.
Okay, Wendy, there was one, and it was a national winner. I want to say maybe a junior, where the girl did like, I mean, it wasn't a performance, but she did like a whole intro where she spoke for a minute. Is that?
Yeah, as a
okay?
narrator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was a video of her.
Yeah,
I mean, it was videotaping her talking about what she was about her documentary. And then it went into her documentary. So I just thought that was interesting and odd all at once.
Yeah.
But she was like the national winner. And then you think, every time I try to show my kids an example of something and say what not to do, then I pull up national winners and they did it. And it's like, never mind.
What I think we've also had kids who like think of it as like, I'm going to be on 60 Minutes, where you can see the interviewer and the interviewee, and kids will do that. I think those things, that's more like a news.
Right.
That's where I think kids, I mean, I would still tell them not to. I would still show them a Ken Burns film, just because then I think it's more clear. But really, this is about not getting into reenactments and costumes and them doing a dramatic portrayal.
Okay.
If that's what they want to do, they should do a performance.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Is that helpful? That's people. I mean, it's a bit of a, it's a good question, because there are so many historical documentaries that do use the reenactment that I think we need to be very clear that that's not what we want. Okay. I feel like that's enough talk about the rules. You ready to talk about the rubrics and the rewritten criteria? So exciting. Okay, I was trying to think about the best way to batch these so that they're not overwhelming to us as we look at them. And I grouped them this way, which is probably not the only way to do it, but It somewhat reads from the top of the judging rubric down. So this isn't the order in which the kids do the work, right? It's just the order in which we kind of have lined up the rubric. So it starts at the top with what I'm going to call the analytical criteria, where you're really looking at the kids' critical thinking skills and how they are able to build their argument. I'm really happy to see thesis or claim clearly stated here, because the language is different in different parts of the country in the way people talk about this. And historians do use the word argument rather than thesis, but basically we're teaching the same thing here. And so you'll notice as well that the column headers have changed, and we have novice at the right side, and then as skills build, the evaluation moves towards the left. All right, so the criteria that the judges will be using, this is what the kids will get back after the contest. Historical argument and theme, and I'm highlighting kind of the qualitative words in the way each descriptor is written so that you can see how they build. But basically the historical argument, the key here is how well have they supported it by their analysis and evidence. And the theme criteria is really about clarity about the theme and how well they've connected the theme and their topic in their project and in their argument. And the more consistently they've been able to do that in a more advanced way, then they're going to get a higher score there. How does this look to you? Does this look like something that you would use with your students maybe as they get to the end of the process? I'll show you the next ones. So the next ones are the research criteria, where we're looking at wide research and use of primary sources. So wide research really refers to the depth and the breadth, the variety of the sources that they have found and are using, and it applies to both primary and secondary. And then the primary sources criteria is more about how they are using primary sources in their project and in their argument. Okay. I call these the narrative arc criteria. That makes sense to me, but I don't know if it's the best way to group these. But this is where we're looking at, remember, we've got to start with the before and the historical context. We need to show multiple perspectives. There isn't a criteria for main event because that's just embedded in all these other ones. And then we need to wrap up with our narrative arc with significance in history, the impact and the outcomes of the topic. So it's the before, the during, the after, and then rolling in multiple perspectives as best they can through the project. Okay. This stuff I hope feels very familiar since we've tried to hit all of these things pretty hard in our sessions. And then I'm calling these technical criteria. So there is a criteria for accuracy, looking at accurate information, credible, and I think this is really helpful language without critical omissions. I would also say, like, this is where, you know, if we have a project that's relating to the Nazis in any way, if kids are not really clear about, you know, we saw this a lot last year where I know kids were really kind of on their own doing their research, and they're out on the internet trying to learn about Hitler and understand him, and they just get it wrong. And so those kinds of things, that's where we will use historical accuracy to indicate to kids, like, you really need to do some more research and understand Hitler or the Nazi party better, or things like that. Okay, and then student voice, which we spent a lot of time talking about already, that is going to appear down with the technical specs which are specific to the different creative categories, but it still is part of the rubric. They just moved it to this other section. And again, it's really about, I like this idea of balance between students' words and ideas and quotes and evidence. And we were talking about this with other coordinators this week. And one of them said, it's not about the students have to have completely new original thinking about their topic, right? We're not looking for the Pulitzer Prize here, but we are looking for their argument and their analysis to be authentic to them. Does that help a little bit with student voice? Yeah, we're not looking for your dissertation that's going to, set you on a pathway to write 3 best-selling books. That's really not what it's about. It is about kids taking that next step from just putting quotes together from other people and then constructing their own thoughts about that and letting that come through in the work. And then for every category, there are technical specifications that are part of the rubric that judges will use to evaluate, in a documentary. What was the sound quality? Could I hear? Was the music too loud? All that kind of stuff. There is a section of technical specs for each of the creative categories. Okay, this year, I debated whether to talk about this, but I think we might as well at least have a little conversation. We are planning to have in-person contests in the spring. We also know that the public health situation could change quickly and we may need to do virtual contests. We already know how to do virtual contests, and so we can make the switch pretty painlessly on our end, as long as we have planned our deadlining and our scheduling appropriately ahead of time, which we are doing. The big and going to a virtual format is really easy for kids who are doing websites, papers, or documentaries, because those 3 categories, you just create you're already creating a digital video of your documentary. You're already going to do your paperwork. You just need to create a PDF of it. Those things are easy. If you are in a performance category and we do virtual contests, you need to be ready to make a video of your performance and submit a video link and a PDF of your paperwork. So that's not too complicated for performances. If you have kids doing exhibits, this is the hardest one for virtual. They will be able to create a digital exhibit using something like Google Draw and submit that, or they can create a 3D exhibit and then they would take pictures and create a slides presentation using our template to submit that. So that's how we did it last year. It's essentially the same. Nationals just released its virtual project formats. They are not much different. And we'll share those out and make sure that you have them. I think that right now what's important is to know that there is a possibility that your exhibit kids might have to compete virtually. There's a possibility that we could have virtual contests early in the spring, but things may change enough that nationals could have an in-person contest. So just knowing that there may need to be some flexibility, and particularly for exhibit kids, kind of being planful about what you decide to build and making sure that whatever you build is flexible and that you could pretty easily make it digital or make it physical if you needed to. Questions about that? It all seems so simple now, doesn't it? It was such a crisis 2 years ago to figure it all out, how to make those be virtual, but now it seems kind of straightforward. I will say our coordinators here in Utah are discussing, talking about when they would need to make an announcement about if we end up having to have virtual contests. And we would like to wait and hope that we can have in-person contests. And so I think that's where your exhibit kids need to just be aware that they need to be ready to kind of go either way. I do think that if they build a digital exhibit in Draw, it's possible to print, if they needed to do that. We are also talking about, if kids have built a digital exhibit and we have an in-person contest, can't they present it on a laptop for the judges to see? So these are things that we still have to figure out, and we've got time. But I think those two format options for exhibits, those will probably remain the same for this year. All right. Well, any other questions? I am so sorry about just the lists and everything. Oh, Lisa, I see your comment about MLA. Yes, they do use parenthetical. I really tried to catch everything in this presentation so that if you needed to go back and reference it, you could. This is the rule book. If you haven't got a copy of it yet, let me know. But you should have gotten your kit by now.
Yeah, I didn't. Did you send me one? I haven't gotten one.
Oh, you know what?
Check.
Yours
You
is
did.
on its way, my friend.
Okay.
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 All right. Did everybody else get theirs? Okay. How do you like the shirts? Yay. I like them too. Yeah. Okay. Well,
Tomorrow,
yeah.
Good
Next,
Friday shirt.
yep. Next week, hopefully you can come for our documentary guest. She's really amazing. And then after that, I think those are our last 2 online sessions. We're getting to the end. I know.
That's scary because it means it's time to start, which I should already be starting, but not yet. We're still trying to get those first few weeks settled down.
So I did have a question about the Park City.
Yeah. Mhm.
That's going to involve more than kind of what we've talked about, right? It's going to involve you've got the guest speaker from the Library of Congress, right? I can't remember her name. I've worked with her before, but
Lynn O'Hara.
that's the one.
Yes. So she is part of the National History Day staff, and she's a former NHD teacher. She's terrific. She's done a lot of more intensive teacher training on research and methodology than I typically do. She does these really intensive summer courses that involve a lot of homework, and they are wonderful.
It was Library of Congress and
Yes.
how to use all those resources, and she had guest speakers come in and all. It was great.
Yep. Yeah. So I mean, there will be some overlap with what we've talked about, but she will go into more depth and bring more to it. So you should come.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure it wasn't like it's not just a repeat of this, right? It's like a little more of an extension. So
It should not be a total repeat. It should be deeper. And the cool thing about it too is that we're partnering with the Park City Museum, and they have a really nice meeting space down where their archives is. And so we're going to get to go back and look at some of their collections in their collection space and talk to the archivist just, briefly. And then we'll finish up by going up to their museum on Main Street and do a little tour.
very cool.
Yeah. And I get to pay for your sub and your lunch. So it should be a good day. It's beautiful in October up there. I hope you can make it. All right, I'm going to stop the recording and then we'll see y'all in a week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Wendy. Appreciate
Bye-bye.
it. Talk to you soon.